The one thing for those of you who do know me, my repetitive nature will be kept intact here today. So we'll be saying some of the things a few times. So if you missed them the first round, don't worry, we'll probably come back to that. So not to disappoint. And what I'm really going to try to do is to pick out some themes for you today, probably 6 to 8 big ones overall. So the premise for today's webinar is pretty much the same premise that I used 2 months ago, and that's that there's money for your religiously affiliated non-public school that a lot of us leave on the table, and that's probably not a good thing because it's taxpayer money, and our parents that support us, that send their children to be educated in our schools, deserve all of our efforts in trying to use that. So I guess, one theme is to continue to encourage you, even though it's a hassle, even though it's work, even though it's something that maybe you didn't sign up to do, working with your public sector schools, school district, your LEA. We'll be looking at LEA a lot. That means the Local Educational Association, which is your local public school. It is to continue to go back to them and to ask, request, I'd even go so far as demand their attention. Now here's the good news, and this is sort of a teaser. The second bullet point there is that there's even going to be more money available in Title IIA once ESEA. So while you were sleeping, the federal government and President Obama signed ESEA, which now replaces NCLB. NCLB stands for the No Child Left Behind Act that we're all familiar with. ESEA stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act, and that was signed last December, but it won't go into effect until 2017-2018. But we'll talk in a moment about why there's going to be more money available to our schools. So that should be some encouragement to go out and interact with your public sector. And your public school district will most likely not go out of their way to ensure that you receive your Title IA or Title IIA appropriations. I'm a little bit of a pessimist when it comes here. I had the pleasure of listening in on our colleagues from ACSI give a webinar on some of this stuff, and they were a lot brighter and optimistic about good relationships with our public schools. And I'm not saying that those of you that are out there don't have that, but I also know that sometimes, depending upon who's in those positions, we wind up not having great communication patterns with those good folks. And here's why. I was told this probably 25, 30 years ago by someone who was a friend of mine in the public sector, who basically looked at me and said, Bear, like, we're not employed here to help your schools out. Our first mission, our first job is to make sure the public schools are all that they can be. And yes, we have some obligation and we have some laws out there that wind up defining relationships between us and you, but you come second. And so it is kind of with that attitude. It's also with 34 years of trying to cajole and sweet talk and work with public schools to wind up getting services from them that it sometimes is like pulling teeth. Not all the time, but sometimes. So I guess I'm an optimistic pessimist when it comes to dealing with our local educational associations. Anyway, but the bottom line, folks, is that the money that the federal government sends to the states and then to the locals, it belongs to our constituents. That's just the bottom line. And we need to be good stewards of all that we're entrusted with. And I would contend we need to be good stewards of that federal money as well. So why do the Christian and Catholic schools not pick up all the money available to them from the federal government? Well, there's probably lots of reasons. I highlighted 2 on the slide that you are seeing, but some other thoughts are that it actually takes a bunch of work, especially the first time, right? And most of us who are administrators in our non-public schools were teachers at one time, and we thought it might be kind of fun, and we might have some gifts to get into administration. But it's not like we signed up for paperwork and for red tape and all of those kinds of things. So, you know, that's, for some of us, that's extremely hard to wind up filling out forms and coming up with objectives and getting that paperwork in on time. It's also confusing and complicated at times. Why? Because it keeps changing, right? I mean, you know that. Seems like every time you turn around, once you engage with the public sector, whether that be at the federal, state, or local level, things keep changing. And so it gets confusing, and sometimes we just, in exasperation, just kind of give up. In some cases, you're going to need to be aggressive, and I really mean that with your public school district. You just are. And you're going to be need to be discerning, because sometimes they tell us stuff that that may or may not actually exist, and this would come under another webinar. But one of the things you always have to do, that I figured out eventually, was that show me the law. Show it to me on paper. I want to see it, because a lot of times our public sector colleagues think that they hear that there are certain ways that they're supposed to treat us in the private schools, the non-publics, and it's just not true. Sometimes we're afraid of federal government interference, right? That the federal government might start meddling in how we run our schools, and that may be a fear. I don't think that necessarily is going to happen. I think that they're pretty standoffish. I'm not a conspiracy theorist either, so I think that if we do get involved with them, that we really don't have much to be afraid. And here's the sense, because we now probably have working relationships with a dozen schools in probably 5 states where they use, for part of their fee to the CLC network, Title IIA money, and we'll be talking specifically about Title IIA in a little bit. And when we try to help those schools go out and recover that money to pay for services, they act as if it's theirs. The public schools just act as if it's there, rather than acting solely as the gatekeeper. The truth is, the federal government gives the LEAs the responsibility of being the gatekeeper. So be it. And there's some rules about how we can access that money. But the point is that we need to keep reminding them in a very nice way that that money is ours. It's not theirs. It's ours, and it's allocated for our use, and that we would really appreciate it if they saw that as well. One of the things I remember getting into a conversation years ago is with some of the people from Grand Rapids, Michigan, Grand Rapids Public Schools, is we were just talking about them assisting our efforts, and you know, kind of just pointed out what would happen if all the Christian schools in their community closed. They'd have to build another 4 or 5 schools. If you had the Catholic schools on top of it, they probably would have had to build 10 schools. They would have gotten thousands of new students. They didn't have the capacity to do that. So we actually play a pivotal role in our communities, not only our faith communities, but also our public square communities, where we are providing a lot of education for a lot of kids. And if we were to go out of business, I think that the public sector would be very hard-pressed to educate all the kids that we do. So what are we going to cover today? Basically 2 things. We're going to look at what's known as the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, and that's where the Title I and Title II programs are housed. There's actually 9 title programs altogether. And then we're going to take a look at Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And even though ESEA was started back in the 60s and Section 504 was back in 1973, they still hold jurisdiction in this day and age. So what is ESEA? Again, it's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. It's an extensive statute, very extensive statute, that funds primary and secondary adjunct education. not primary education. And that's why we qualify for both Title I-A and Title II-A funding, is because it is seen as adjunct supplemental to the educational programs that we provide and that parents pay for. Now, what's happened with ESEA is that there's been 3 major reauthorizations. The first one coming in 1985, and that was known as the Eisenhower Act. I remember when I came here in 1981, pretty soon, going into meetings of administrators, and they were talking about their Eisenhower funds. Well, that was the first reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That then, in 2001, morphed into the No Child Left Behind Act, which will go out of existence in August of this year, and yet there's sort of a 1-year gap. So the feds are going to fund it, but it really doesn't exist. Basically, Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act this fall of 2015. President Obama signed it in December of 2015, but it won't go into effect until 2017. So really, in the last 51, 52 years, the title programs have changed considerably. But as first mandated in 1965, the funds were authorized for professional development, instructional materials, and support to innovative educational programs to underserved populations. And there's facets of all of those, right? Professional development, instructional materials, innovative educational programs, underserved populations. If you take those 4 kind of themes, that's still why the ESEA still exists now under the Every Student Succeeds Act. Oh, let me just note, I made a typo here, and if you look at that slide, the last bullet point there, it says Every Student Success Act. That's wrong. It's Every Student Succeeds Act, and I caught that on my last go around, and just didn't get it in time to change the slide. And I don't know, James, you trying to do that right now? No. You'll just leave it. So I acknowledge that I got that wrong. So ESSA stands for Every Student Succeeds Act. Okay, so which programs provide services to our private school teachers and students under this ESEA and soon to be ESSA? Well, Title I, and that has to do with improving the academic achievement of the disadvantaged. And the subtitle is Improving Basic Programs Operated by LEAs. In other words, that gives grants to local educational agencies. And if you have the right demographics, you can, of low-income families in your private non-public schools catchment area, you can qualify for Title I. And Title I basically provides some tutorial assistance in math and reading primarily to economically disadvantaged kiddos, and that's how they wind up directing the funding. We're going to see in a moment that it's got to be about 35% of the LEA needs to have low-income folks for Title I money to be available from the feds through the state, through the local on down to us. But for instance, we were down doing some work at Rehoboth Christian in Gallup, New Mexico, and they are in an economically disadvantaged neighborhood there, and they wind up having a full-time reading teacher and a full-time math teacher because of their high incidence of economic deprivation that they take students in from. Title II, that's the one that that was the Eisenhower money that we used to call back in the 80s until that changed. But Title II monies are preparing, training, and recruiting high-quality teachers and principals. So yes, all of us administrators as well. And the subtitles are Teacher and Principal Training and Recruiting Funds Supporting Effective Instructional State Grants. But then the other piece, and this is something that you might know about in the back of your head, but you never focused on it because it wasn't really available to your schools, is that money could also be used to reduce class size. But that money really wasn't available to us. It was available to the public sector schools only, and there's a reason for that, which we'll see in a moment. But in the past, the reduced class size and the professional development were primarily where Title II money would wind up going, and the change is on this reduced class size, and that's where we pick up some more money beginning in 2017. So under ESEA, what services must be provided? Well, services or benefits that are equitable to those provided to eligible public school children, their teachers, and their families. So this is very much like IDEA. The IDEA, federal IDEA law, winds up having in it the provision that we in private schools should get equitable services to those that are in the public schools, within the statutes or within the law. Now, just like with IDEA, these services must be developed in consultation with officials of the private school. So, technically you're supposed to get a telephone call from your public school every year. You guys should get 2 of them. You should get them from the public school special education department saying, hey, it's time to come in and talk about what you can get through IDEA funding. And then the second one would be from another branch of federal funding, which is ESEA. And they're supposed to reach out to us, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes as well. And you need to know that these services are designed to meet our private school students' educational needs and supplement the educational services provided by the private school. Supplement, not take precedent, right? Not take precedent. And that's going to come up as well. So some of these themes, the services must supplement, not take precedent. And so ESEA and ESSA services provided by the LEA for your private school are designed to meet the educational needs and supplement, right? And here I am repeating myself again, but it's important that you understand that, because really the bottom line, sort of the baseline for federal funding is that no federal or state funding can come into our schools to help us really pay our bills. In other words, help with our tuition rates. What the feds wind up doing and sending is, if the services are directed towards kiddos, that would be Title I, right? The money goes for teachers to get kids who come from disadvantaged areas, who have low reading and math scores, and so consequently they get the benefit, not our school. Now you might say, well, hey, come on, we might have to hire a remedial teacher if we didn't have the Title I teacher. You could probably make a case, but don't, because you're getting the Title I teacher for free. But that's the thinking. And it's the same way in the Title II. The Title II is that your school is not getting the direct benefit from that. Your teachers are getting the direct benefit. So it goes to a person. So it either needs to go to kids or it needs to go to teachers, and not directly to benefit the school, even though supplementally it does affect the school and helps us out in a great way. So how do you access the U.S. Department of Education programs that serve your students? Well, typically, right, the LEA should be contacting you. We already talked to that, right? once they decide that it's the time of the year for them to consult with you, they should be calling you. And your LEA may also have guidelines and paperwork schedules in order to process your Title 1A or Title 2A funding requests. Please request such information when acknowledging your intent to participate. So you actually have to accept their invitation, and we're going to find out in a few moments. A lot of times they're not going to contact you, so you need to wind up contacting them. And I think a number of you are very familiar with your school improvement plan. We'll look at that in a moment too. That's how you get your Title 2A funds, right? You have to come up with a school improvement plan. What are your goals, right? And I do know some of the school districts that we work with, public school districts, actually have forms that we can use and fill out and get it back to them. So it's not painless. There is paperwork. There are timelines, but you need to find out what those are to from your public sector. Are private schools whose students or teachers receive equitable services under ESEA or IDEA considered to be recipients of federal financial assistance? I wouldn't say with all schools that I've dealt with, and I've probably dealt with, I don't know, certainly over 100, probably maybe even close to 150 schools in my 35 years now. But there's a little bit of an uneasiness in our private schools, particularly our religiously affiliated private schools, that we're going to be recipients of federal financial assistance. Some of the schools, depending upon religious affiliation, want to stay away from that like the plague. Other schools don't seem to mind it. But the bottom line here is, private schools whose students and teachers receive equitable services under ESEA, so either the Title I or the Title II or IDEA. So that means child find, that means your psychologist, that means your speech therapist, that means your occupational therapist, that those two pots, ESEA or IDEA, are not considered direct federal financial assistance. Now, in a moment, we're going to look at the definition of what does qualify as direct federal financial assistance, but that's not it. So anything out of your title programs, anything out of your public sector special ed IDEA monies, and if since a number of you are from the state of Michigan that are listening, is that they combine that with some general fund money as well, but that is not considered federal financial assistance. And these, why? Because again, here's the theme. These programs are considered to be operated for the benefit of students and teachers in private schools, not for the benefit of the private schools themselves. Now, one of the things that I was going to explain is, so what does qualify then as federal funds? If a private school receives federal financial assistance, including a grant or subgrant of federal funds to implement a federal education program, the school would be considered a recipient. Well, that's a lot of big words. What's that mean? So here's the examples. School lunch programs, anti-drug programs, technology grants. Those would be seen as federal programs with federal money that are of direct benefit to the school. And I remember back in the day, might have been the late 90s, early aughts, it might have just been the 90s, but it seemed like almost every time I walked into a school, there was someone from the sheriff's department doing some kind of a program through that was funded with federal money. A lot of it was anti-drug, a lot of it was safety. And so that potentially, back in that day, if it was funded by, maybe it was funded by local money, but if it was funded by federal money, then in fact, you would be considered to be accepting federal financial assistance, okay? Now, if a private school is a recipient of federal financial assistance, then your school, is subject to the federal civil rights laws prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and age. If a private school is not a recipient, but the private schools, students and teachers receive equitable services under ESEA or IDEA. The LEA involved remains responsible for ensuring that there is no discrimination with respect to the federal education program. So it's not like the feds aren't concerned about discrimination. They are absolutely concerned about discrimination. But the locus of responsibility is different. If you receive federal financial assistance, then you and your school is responsible for making sure that there isn't discrimination going on in other things that the federal government set up. If you're only involved with title programs under ESEA or your speech therapy, occupational therapy, school psychologist under IDEA, then it's not your responsibility to oversee those services as far as discrimination goes. That then reverts back to the LEA, your local public school, because they're the ones that have jurisdiction there. So again, some of this, isn't a huge deal for us, but, there is kind of, the more I study this, and the more I had to delve into this, there is method to the madness. There really is method to the madness. So, what are specific services available to private schools under Title I, Part A? Well, to the extent, and this is just a quote, and so I'm just going to have to read it, to the extent consistent with the number of eligible children identified in the section in the school district served by a local educational agency, LEA, who are enrolled in private schools, and LEA shall, after timely and meaningful consultation with appropriate private school officials, provide such children on an equitable basis benefits under Title I. So the big idea from this slide is that after timely and meaningful consultation. And I sit in administrative meetings on a regular basis. I've sat in administrative meetings for 34, 35 years, and we don't talk about this stuff. I don't hear us in the private schools and the non-publics talking about, wow, I just got some timely and meaningful consultation with our private school officials. We don't think in that way. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of times our private school officials don't think that way. But there are timelines, okay, timelines under IDEA as well as under ESEA where the schools need to meet with us. And usually it's the spring of the year when we have to wind up putting in our school development plan for the following year, and we usually find out about our allocations in the fall, and that's really based upon enrollment for the following year. So you kind of got to get your paperwork in this spring, and I know a bunch of you are working on that because some of you call us and want to know what wording they should use if you want to use some of our professional development services. So anyway, the big deal here is the timely and meaningful consultation with appropriate private school officials. Now, the nature of the services, right? And you've seen this list before. I know you have. They need to be neutral. They need to be non-sectarian. They need to be non-ideological. There needs to be no direct benefit to the private school and no discrimination of access. In other words, you can't say this kid can get into the Title I services and this kid can't. And there's got to be good reason for that. They either qualify or they don't qualify. And so that's just kind of a laundry list of what the services need to be. And then the LEA should consult, again, with us during the design and development of such agencies' programs under this part on issues, and now there's another laundry list, right, is that in that timely and meaningful consultation, the people that are from your public schools that are charged with the delivery of these ESEA services, soon to be ESEA, is how will the children's needs be identified, what services will be offered, how, where, and by whom the services will be provided, public school or third-party contract. Now we're gonna come around to that. how the services will be academically assessed, and how the results of that assessment will be used to improve those services. Let's go back to the third bullet point. One of the wives' tales that I've heard for my time in education as an administrator is the fact that the public school has to wind up delivering, particularly Title I services. It's simply not true. Now, maybe you all know that out there, but I'm sensing that somebody out there who's listening today does not know that. And you can have a third-party contract. So that means you can go to somebody who is a trusted tutor. You can go bring somebody in that you want to. Now, do they have to allow that third-party contract? We'll see in a moment. No. But if they say no, if you say, I got Joey Smith, Joey Smith's been out there, certified teacher and has worked with kids for 25 years, and it'd be a perfect fit for our school, and that's the person I want to come in to service our Title I reading contract. And if your public schools say no, they have to tell you why. And they have to put it in writing. So it doesn't mean that they're not going to disavow it. It doesn't mean that they're not going to allow you to make the pick as a third-party contract, but you have the right to request it, and they can wind up agreeing to it. But if they don't, you have no recourse, except for you can actually, if you wanted to take the time, you can appeal to the state, to the ESEA, to the state educational agency, but depends how much time you have. Okay, so what specific services are available? Again, we're kind of on that. What are they? How and when the LEA will make decisions about the delivery of services, including a thorough consideration and analysis of the views of the private school officials on the provision of services through a contract with potential third-party providers. You should be able to call up your public school tomorrow morning, and they should be able to tell you, right, what their plan is, right? When are they going to make decisions about delivery of services? How are they going to contact you in a timely and meaningful way? And what about third-party providers? And you should be able to have a conversation with them about that. Now, how if the LEA disagrees with your views of the private school officials on the provision of services through a contract, the LEA will provide in writing an analysis of the reasons why the LEA has chosen not to use a contract, right? They can say, hey, we have this perfectly capable professional development provider on our staff who is an expert in evidence-based instruction, response to intervention, universal design for learning, whatever the hot topics are, restorative justice. I'd like to find one of those, though, in the public schools, right? And so they've got to tell you. And so, again, don't be afraid to assert yourself, assert what makes sense for you, assert what you want to wind up happening. And the worst that can happen is sort of like folks like going out to see a donor. What's the worst thing that can happen when you go see a donor when you're trying to do a capital campaign or raise some money? They can say no. It's the same way with our public schools. Now, it is true that the LEA has the final authority to allocate the money. And in a moment, particularly from low-income families who attend our schools. So there really are, when I researched this, there's 5 poverty measures that can be used for Title I, right? But generally, my experience in reality is that schools usually use the free and reduced lunch calculations, right? That seems to be a common thread. But there are 4 other ways that they can wind up looking at poverty measures. But the simplest and the easiest is free and reduced lunch, because most schools have that information already. Now, C on here here's where the rub is, right? Your Title I rub can come from is the fact that the application for funding for Title I, not Title II, but Title I must come from the student's resident district, not the local LEA. So whereas your IDEA services come from your local public school, your Title IIA funding comes from your local public school that your school is residents, but unfortunately Title I, Part A, that money comes from the LEA where the student lives. So here's what happens in our public schools. You may, non-public schools, private schools, is your school may be surrounded by 5 public school districts. And your Title I money gets divided up into little dribs and drabs, and you've got to be talking to 5 different local public schools. I know that that's up in western Michigan, up in the Muskegon area. There's lots of small little school districts, and sometimes it drives those folks crazy up there because they have a lot of low-income folks in their school system, but they have to deal with 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 different school districts. So that's a little bit of a problem, but again, if you can spend the time, understand the system, develop the relationship with your local public schools, your LEAs, then you can wind up potentially accessing. Now, I believe my pals down in Gallup, New Mexico, it's a large district. They don't have that many districts, and so consequently they get a large chunk of money. I should have asked them how many different school districts they have to make application to, but I don't, I never did do that. I might follow up and do that someday. Got a question there, James?
Maybe you'll have to read it over first.
Oh, okay. Can you give me a new, is that in the new slide? There you go. So let's move from Title I to Title II.
Actually, there I will.
Yes.
I will
yep.
break in here to ask this question. We have a question here. How would homeschool families fit into all of this?
Whoa. That's, you know, that's a good question. And here's my honest answer. I don't know. And here's why. CLC Network doesn't pay me to understand how homeschool families, I really don't know. I've never been asked that question, and we don't really work with homeschool families. So sorry, I can't answer that one. I would wind up calling your local LEA and asking the questions. How do we fit in? How do we fit into the title programs? So what specific services are available under Title II? Well, the first provision is the provision that we know about, right? To increase the academic achievement of all students by helping schools improve teacher and principal quality through what? High quality professional development. The second provision, though, is not available to us, and this is where we're going to start getting more money starting in 2017, and that's to increase the academic achievement of all students by helping schools reduce class size. I remember that this was a really big provision, and it was even in the name for the Eisenhower funds. It was professional development and class. I think the early one was something to the effect of professional development and class reduction funds. And that's still out there. It's still being utilized, and the men and women in Washington are going to put a stop to that. So, and the reason that we never got the class size reduction money was simply because that would be seen as helping out our private school. Imagine you getting, right, $20,000 to reduce your class size. That'd be a wonderful blessing for our private schools, our religiously affiliated non-publics, but yet that would help the school. It does not necessarily, helping out directly students or teachers. So there again, it would be seen as a direct benefit. So what's the relationship between professional development and the school improvement plan? We talked about that a few moments ago. Oh, wait a minute. What slide are we on, James? I got discombobulated here. Do you have a number there? Sorry, folks. I lost my place. Imagine that. Okay, I know where we are right now. Okay, can we go back one more? Yes. Right there. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Nope. Got to go back one more. We got distracted. So, what is meant by high quality professional development? I knew I had a slide on that was able to define that. So here's the things. This is how they define it. Improve and increase teachers' knowledge of academic subjects are an integral part of broad school-wide and district educational improvement plans. Okay, and we got that nailed. I mean, you just have to do it. Give teachers and principals the knowledge and skills to help students meet state academic requirements. Improve classroom management skills. Are sustained, intensive, and classroom-focused and are not one-day or short-term workshops. And advance teacher understanding of effective instruction strategies that are based on scientifically based research. Now, I just want to focus on numbers 4, 5, and 6. I can tell you that here in our organization, we get a lot of requests for professional development and just a lot of requests for assistance. And the number one reason why people hit our website is asking for behavior management, classroom management skills. And that's the number one thing that teachers and then even parents wind up coming to us for. So, you know, that's one of the high quality professional development. So any professional development on classroom management skills, behavior management skills would fly right through the Title II folks. Look at 5. That's really interesting. Are sustained, intensive, and classroom focused and are not one-day or short-term workshops. Okay, wives' tale number 2 or 3, whichever one we're on, is the wives' tale was the fact that no, if you're going to get the public school to sign off on our professional development, you better be going to a seminar. You better have a one-day in-service. No. The actual wording is that the law, the feds, want us to have sustained, intensive, and classroom-focused and are not, look at that, are not one-day or short-term workshops. Now, that fits right into CLC's model. Those of you who are out there listening that actually are in relationship with us and use our services, that's our model. We'll come in and do professional development on whatever it is. It could be on RTI. It could be on benchmarking and progress monitoring. So we'll do the in-service. We'll help you get involved with DIBELS or Ames Web or NWEA, whatever you're involved with. But then we'll keep coming back and helping you work through it, looking at the data, right? So, right, these are sustained. We like sustained, and that is our model. And so when I got to this, that was like great news because again, I bought the wives' tale, but it's very clear, number 5. And then advanced teacher understanding of effective instruction strategies that are scientifically based research, and that's best practices. That's what we at CLC stand for. That's why you're listening here today. And I know that you in the schools that are out there are concerned about the fact that it's research-based, that it actually does what it says it's going to do. Evidence-based instruction starts with that premise, that the materials and the methodologies and the techniques we're going to use actually deliver the goods, that the books really do teach reading at 3rd grade, math at 2nd grade, writing at 1st grade. And now we can go to places like whatworksclearinghouse.org and other websites and find that out. So I just found this really, really, really very, very, very interesting because it validates what our gut told us a long, long time ago. So again, this is a reiteration. of what we did. So, you know, basically this slide, we can wind up saying, look, if you catch the themes of the day, the best practice themes of the day, you know, and we've talked about RTI, right? That benchmarking, intervening, progress monitoring, getting kids back up to speed and to grade level. There's nothing hotter than that out there. That's what school's about. And so you can always access Title II A professional development for that. UDL, right? Universal Design for Learning. You have the high-tech part of it, right? Everything that's on computer. And then you also have the low-tech, which is the graphic organizers and everything else that you can wind up dealing with. Well, I'm going to go quickly through this slide because I want to get to Section 504. And guess what? I'm running over. Imagine that. What this is basically saying is, look at the money from the feds is coming to the state, and then it gets distributed, and they do it in one big block grant. All right? The last sentence, promote coordination among programs and reduce paperwork. Imagine that. Next slide. So you can see here that there is some awards, right? This is the kind of money that was allocated under Title II. And I just picked 5 states that we're involved in. And you can see that the money's not going up, that the money is going down in 2014. But here's the key. As of fiscal 2017, private schools will get 100% of their Title II Part A funding, right? Without, why? Without a withdrawal for reduced class size taken out in advance. This is a little known part. Let me try to have this make sense to you. Is that if your LEA, local educational agency, winds up getting $100,000, they could, in the past, under No Child Left Behind, say, we're going to take 40% of that money and we're going to use it for reduced class size. And that's going to leave 60% of that money available for Title IIA. So your grants for the last so many years under No Child Left Behind, and I assume under Eisenhower as well, has been not 100% of what's available to Title IIA. Now, what's really good for us is that in this reauthorization, they wound up knocking out a whole bunch, right? So No Child Left Behind, there's no Highly Qualified Teacher Act, that whole highly qualified teacher deal that our public sector, that's gone. Minimum yearly expectation, minimum yearly increase in skills, that's gone. And what's also gone is this particular reduced class size. So now, in the old way, your school district gets $100,000. They're going to put 40, and this is just so I can do the math quickly. They're going to take 40% of that for reduced class size. That leaves $60,000 to be divided up for professional development to all the public schools, all the Catholic schools, all the Christian schools, all of the Baptist schools, whatever, all of the private schools in your district. Starting in 2017, you will be able to have 100%. So if your school district gets 100% or gets $100,000, right, you will be allotted your Title IIA money based on that 100,000, not under the 60,000. And here's how they get to the available funds. So the available funds in an LEA are divided into a per pupil amount using the total number of public and private school students served in a district. So if your district gets $100,000 and you have 100 kids, then you could, out of whatever it is, and that you get that percentage of money that's available to you based upon the full $100,000. Now, the public schools can still take money out for reduced class size, but it's not going to come out of your piece. It will come out of their piece. So if 80% of the students in your LEA wind up being from the public school, 80% of $100,000 would be $80,000. Public schools can do whatever they want. But you're going to get, and 20% of the students from that public sector go to private schools, you're going to get all $20,000. You're not going to get the number that's less based upon them taking all of the money, that all the 40%. So I don't know if I'm explaining that well or not, but basically you should see a jump in your allocation for your Title IIA, not for this fall, but in the fall of 2017, you should have a larger number. And here's the other piece. Your public schools should be able to explain that to you a whole lot better than I just did. Okay? You can ask them. You have the right to ask them, tell me how you got the number. Let's say they called you and they said, hey, you've got $20,000. I'm thinking of one of the schools that we deal with has $20,000. You have $20,000 for Title IIA. You can ask them this year, so how did you come to that? Show me the formula. They can't say, no, we're not going to do that. No, it's your right to see that formula. Now, the theory would be that that $20,000 that the school is getting will take some kind of a jump because the public schools are skimming off the top of that in order to reduce some of their class size. That's the theory anyway. We're going to have to wait till 2017 for to see if, in fact, that is if it's going to happen or not. All right. The next couple slides are just a review. We've gone over that one. Next one, James. Again, the number 3, the private school ESEA services must be equitable. In other words, right? I mean, they can't give us bunk. They got to give us the good stuff, whatever that is. Developed in consultation between us and designed to meet our needs, not their needs, our needs. And that's why you can fill out a school improvement plan that's based upon what you want to try to accomplish. And then the big thing is that as of 2017, 2018, 100% of the Title IIA allocations will come to us. All right. Next slide. We went over this. I told you when. Okay, next slide. Okay. Well, look at that. We got 33 minutes, huh? We're farther along than we were last time. So what's the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1960? All of you have heard of Section 504 plans. Those are good plans. But who has to absolutely do them? And then I want to make a case for why we should do them. And if you take money from federal funds that are neither ESEA or IDEA funds, then we can wind up saying that you've received federal funding. Remember that slide that showed that, you know, if you took money for hot lunch programs, for drug programs, for some technology programs, even if they were run through a third-party vendor, it didn't matter. Follow the money. If the money came from the feds and it was of direct benefit to your school, now you may disagree that it was direct benefit, doesn't matter. It's not your rules, it's their rules. You wind up getting those folks to say that you've taken federal funds. If that's the case, then you have to wind up putting Section 504 plans in effect. But as the last bullet point said, it's a good idea to create a Section 504 plan for your students who have a functional impairment or disability that is not covered under IDEA, right? And why do I say that? Well, here's one of the things, right? We can go out in our private schools and we don't need to hire certified teachers. Matter of fact, some of the more fundamentalist non-public schools, religiously affiliated schools, do that. They will hire folks that are not certified. But I know that if you're a member of the Michigan Association of Non-Public Schools, if you're a member of Christian Schools International, if you're a member of ACSI, the Association of Christian Schools International, that what we stand for is quality education. So we want certified educators in our classroom, whether that's in general education, elementary, middle school, high school, or special education. That's why we at the CLC Network have always hired certified special educators. Now, are there some schools out there that wind up using non-certs? Yes, but part of our reason for being involved with some of those schools is that those schools can wind up using us and our certification as the certified teacher of record so that they're not alone. There are some very, very small schools that that we wind up working with, and one of those is with us here today. And they do not, as of yet, have a certified teacher, but they wind up contracting with us. And so they wind up gaining their certification credentials through us. So it's another way of doing it. But, you know, you write a Section 504 plan because it's a best practice, because it's a good thing to do. But you don't need to write a Section 504 plan to everybody, right? We have our IEPs. We like to call them, at least in the schools we're involved with, ISPs, right? If you don't have one of those, maybe just an accommodation plan is good enough. Maybe you want to slap the name Section 504 plan on top. That's fine. It doesn't much matter. It's all the same thing. But what it gets at, the best practice is doing right by kids by giving them accommodations, putting it in writing, and following that. So again, if you absolutely have to follow Section 504, it's that federal funding thing. And, you know, sometimes you receive federal funds in school lunch programs, anti-drug programs, programs designed for at-risk, educational reform, technology grants. Again, that was just a laundry list that I found. And so, you know, if you do, it's not that big a deal. Even if you don't, it's not that big a deal. I'm suggesting that best practice, a good practice, is to write a Section 504 plan to begin with. Now, okay, so you got that? Is that, look at the second bullet point. So the Section 504 provision applies even if your private school receives the federal funding indirectly, okay? And it just states the same kind of stuff that on why and where that may happen. So what constitutes a Section 504 disability? Whether you have to or not, right? Whether you have to or not. How do we need to think about kids who might learn differently because of a hidden disability or an overt disability? Well, under Section 504, a student is deemed to have a disability if the student has, and there's two pieces to it, a physical or mental impairment which substantially, and number two, limits one or more major life activities. Now, if you go back to IDEA, there's all kinds of criteria for someone who is cognitively impaired or learning disabled or autistic. Section 504 picks up discrimination after that's been exhausted and if it's not covered. So what are we talking about? What about limits one or more major life activities, such as, well, such as caring for oneself, such as walking, such as seeing, such as hearing. In other words, you might not qualify for being visually impaired within the state or federal guidelines under IDEA or the state laws that you have, but you still have problems with seeing or hearing. Speaking, breathing, you have problems with just working, doing work, having enough either mental energy or physical energy to work, performing mental tasks. And the last one is learning, including paying attention. And that is the one place that in the schools that we work with, a Section 504 plan comes in handy if it's a true functional impairment. And that's with ADD. That's with executive functions, right? Section 504 is a place that we can wind up writing an accommodation plan, a service plan for a kiddo who has ADD, because ADD is not covered under IDEA. ADD is not covered under the federal laws. So, does Section 504 obligate your schools to enroll students with disabilities? Well, it does, but only if the student is otherwise qualified to participate in the program with or without minor adjustments. Section 504 does not require a private school to modify its essential enrollment criteria. It does not require, it does require private schools to provide reasonable accommodations. And this is where the Section 504 plan is useful. So if the student can meet your program criteria with minor adjustments, so needing additional time to complete, let's say you're taking a student and let's say you have an entrance exam, and let's say the student needs to take some extra time, always has extra time, and you know that. You should provide that if you don't want to discriminate against him or her, right? That's considered a reasonable adjustment or accommodation. So reasonable accommodation means a school must take reasonable steps to accommodate one's disability so that students can perform the essential functions of being a student. But it does not mean that accommodations would cause the school undue hardship. So just because you get, let's take an extreme example. If you have a teacher certified in cognitive impairment and you have been giving services out to students who have Down syndrome coupled with a cognitive impairment, and you have someone come to your door and wants enrollment for, and they have a Down syndrome cognitively impaired student, you already provide that service. You can't discriminate. You got it. However, if you don't serve students with a cognitive impairment, with Down syndrome, with speech concerns, and someone comes to your door and wants to come in, you don't have to provide it. In other words, that would wind up being, that's not a minor adjustment. You got to go out and hire a staff. You got to modify the curriculum. That's a huge deal, right? That's a huge deal. So that's where you can draw the line, right? And it's minor adjustments. Can you increase your tuition or program costs for students with disabilities? So let's say you do want to take that kiddo, you don't have any programs, and you want to take that kiddo in that has a cognitive impairment, and you do want to start services for kids with more limited significant cognition concerns. Yeah, you can seek reimbursement from the disabled student's parents, right? If it results in a substantial increase in cost to the private school. But isn't this interesting? Then in the very next sentence in the information that I have, as a general rule, a private school should not charge additional costs to students with disabilities. And then there was a footnote. Please note, there is little, if any, authority delineating what constitutes a substantial cost. So there again, it's clear as mud. But the point being is that it is not illegal to wind up charging more, and some of our schools do. Now, we at CLC Network have been a champion of tuition equity for years and years and years. But we have been a champion of tuition equity for the students who are coming from families that have entrusted all of their children to your school. Every once in a while, you'll get a student coming in from the outside that if there's 4 kids in the family, 3 of them are going to stay in the public schools, and they just want your special education services because they have heard they're wonderful, and they are. And that's not why you have it. We're not here to be in competition with the public schools. And so there's a reasonableness to charging those folks more. And again, if you want to talk anything like that out, please give me a call. Does Section 504 apply to students with ADD, ADHD? We just talked about. Well, here's the real truth. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sorry, it can't be any clearer than that. But, example, if a student with ADHD is succeeding in school, the student's ADHD is not substantially affecting the major life activity of learning, and thus the student generally would not be considered a student with a disability. So he may be diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. They may be on medication. That medication may, be at serviceable levels and working really well, and the student can attend. The student can live up to his or her potential. There's no functional impairment then, and so you would not necessarily say that that student needs accommodations. So the term that we like to use is you have to determine if there's a functional impairment. The fact that a student is receiving passing grades is not necessarily, so this is the yin and the yang, right? The fact that a student is receiving passing grades does not necessarily mean that the ADHD is not substantially limiting the student's learning if the disorder results in a child with academic gifts receiving C's rather than A's and B's. So that's a case where it's yes. But by the same token, the fact that a student with ADHD is receiving all F's would not necessarily indicate that the student's disorder is the cause of the poor grades. It could be a bad attitude. It could be the fact that there's some concerns at home. Maybe the student is, God forbid, homeless and isn't able to attend to homework or to study or to prepare properly, right? So just because a student's doing well does not necessarily mean that the ADHD is not limiting the learning. But if he's doing poorly, it doesn't necessarily mean that he or she is. You've got to decide, is the impairment functional? Does it have a result? So whose responsibility is it to determine that? Well, for private schools that do not offer special education programs, arguably, there's no affirmative obligation to identify students with disabilities. So let's say you're in a school that has absolutely no support service. You have no certified trained staff. You don't even have paraprofessionals who have been doing this for a long time. There's nobody can assume that you're going to be able to do that. Now you need to be upfront with that when you're talking to people, but there's no nefarious ADD or Section 504 police out there that are going to come in and say, you absolutely have to do that. No, if you're not doing it, you're not doing it. Because Section 504 is an anti-discrimination lawsuit. If a private school does not know or has no reason to know that a student has a disability, the private school cannot be said to have discriminated against any student on the basis of a disability that the school didn't even know existed. Now, CLC Network stands with you to say we have to do right by students who struggle. We have to do right by students who have ADD. We need to do right by students who have a cognitive impairment. We need to do right by students who have learning disabilities. And so we want to help you become as good at diagnosing that and supporting that and working with that in your general education classrooms. But if you don't have it, you don't have it. So if you have special education programs, you do have an affirmative obligation to evaluate students who may be in need of Section 504 protection. And so once you take that step, whether it is just doing a Woodcock-Johnson within your school, if it's getting the public sector in to do a child find, or whether you contract with us for our evaluation services, once you do it, you need to do it. And once you take that step, it's a pretty good idea to provide an official 504 plan. Again, I contend that a Section 504 plan is just a good thing to have around and to make sure that you wind up using. So, right, here's a good way to look at it. The official 504 plan is whatever you make of it. Let me tell you a story. There is no official 504 plan form. You can look high and low. You can go to websites. You can wind up asking schools, and every 504 plan will look a little bit different. And that's because the feds have no official form. So this is a cute story. This happened probably 20 years ago. We were beginning to be involved very heavily with students in the Christian schools that were wanting to go on and get extended time and other accommodations for their SAT, ACT. And when we would send the paperwork off to Princeton, New Jersey to get adjudicated on whether they would accept the fact that this was a functional impairment, let's go back to that word. The reason functional impairment is important, and the reason we want to keep track of it through either an ISP form, an IEP form, or a Section 504 form, is because when we ask for accommodations, whether that's for the ACT, SAT, or when we go on to college, because right now our colleges, it used to be you could walk into a college and say, hey, I got ADD, I need some help. And in the early days of that, in the late 80s, early 90s, mainly early 90s, places like junior colleges or our faith-based college institutions would say, sure, we're here to help you out. Now, they have too much business now, and everybody wants a leg up and everybody wants some help. So we need to have a track record. So we had, within our system of paperwork out of the CLC network, we had an accommodation form, just a regular old accommodation form, and that's what it said on top, said accommodation form. It had our logo, and we would religiously fill that out. Our staff that were in the local schools would fill that out, and it would matriculate up, and so by the time you got into high school, by the time it was ready to make application to get extended time or to have a reader for your ACT, SAT, or multiple days, that track record was in place, and we started getting rejected. And certain one of the adjudicators down in Princeton, New Jersey, wound up saying, where's your official 504 plan? Well, we didn't have an official 504 plan, right? We didn't have that. We had an accommodation form. And so as we were processing this, because there's nothing worse than having the legitimacy of a student's need for accommodations to take those high stakes tests and not have them vetted, not have them approved. And one of our staff members, just on a whim, and went and wound up putting official 504 plan, accommodations plan. And it didn't even look that good, but it just said on the top, official 504 plan or Section 504 accommodations plan. Then it even said that again, and started sending those into Princeton, New Jersey, and guess what? Well, you know the answer. They started saying, oh, you have an official 504 plan, and you seem to happen to have about 7 of these, so it must be a functional impairment. It must be okay. It's been long-standing, and so yes, you can have a reader, and you can have extended time, and you can have multiple days. And so that's how silly things get from time to time. But it's like anything else. You have to know how to play the system. Well, I'm going to let you, do they get copies of this, James?
I'm not sure if Katie already sent it out.
Okay. Well, this is my colleague, a good-looking fellow, I think, for all my 34 years. Actually, Phil Stejnik was here prior to 1 year prior. He started at CLC Network in 1980, and I started in 1981, and he has been with me and by my side, and we have mentored each other through thick or thin. Anyway, he has a nice summary here on Section 504 that we hope you will get to see. I'm not going to go over it because I want to leave some time for questions. It's just, again, a reiteration. Well, there it is. There it is. Why don't you go back to that, and we'll just leave the slide, and you can read it while I kind of wrap up. And James, about every 30 seconds, you can change it and kind of go through Phil's summary here. Now, I do believe last time, and unfortunately our pal and colleague Katie Barkley is not with us today, and she'll hopefully be back tomorrow or certainly by the end of the week, and hopefully she will wind up being able to send you copies. Hey, if you're out there in webinar land and you actually have hard copy of this stuff, can you shoot James an email so that we don't have to wonder ourselves whether you have that or not? But we do want to make sure that it's available. And if you at this point have any questions that you would like to ask, please do. So let me, while you're thinking about that or while you're typing to James, let me just say that there is some money out there that I would like you to get as much of as possible. The good news is more is going to be available after 2017. You might have to work for it. It might be a hassle, but it's your money. It's not anybody else's money. So we might as well not leave at a table. I had a story one time. We're involved with a school that literally called us and said, you know, we just found out that we're leaving $18,000 on the table every year because we didn't want to get involved with the public schools or the government. And, you know, I was just told in a casual conversation that we're leaving all this money on the table. And you know what? That's not right either. We've got to access that. And so they did, and now they're doing all kinds of things with that. So that's my encouragement to you, is to ask those questions and to get your plan in and to find out what third-party provider you want to use and what your goals are. It has to meet your needs. It needs to be equitable. They can't be stingy. You should get what you get. And, you know, that's kind of on the federal funding side, so that takes care of ESEA. And then the thing to learn from Section 504 is that with that Section 504, we, you know, just like we want to have certified teachers, because we're going to do the right thing in our religiously affiliated non-publics, we also want to write Section 504 plans. We need to wind up thinking about, you know, the concept of functional impairment. We want to make sure that when it's a legitimate disability or a legitimate concern, that we wind up supporting the kiddos that God has entrusted to us. Any questions there, James? Or are they questioned out, huh? They're probably so confused out there in Blogland or with this webinar that it doesn't make sense. But here's the deal. I think James has up there my email address as well as my phone number. And part of my job here in semi-retirement is to walk with you on behalf of this organization through issues like this and a few others that have been kind of bequeathed to me for the next year or two. And so if you want to start all over again, which you probably don't, but if you did, I can walk you through that. But please do your due diligence. I encourage you. You know, be tough if you need to be. Be inquisitive. Don't take no for an answer. Don't believe them on first blush in the public sector. Wind up telling them, show it to me. Show me where it says that if you think you've been given a wives' tale. Get that money and then do right by the kids. Believe in best practices. Use that Section 504 plan whether you have to or not. And I think that your schools will be blessed. That's about all I got. We can even end 7 minutes early.
Yeah, it looks like I'm not seeing any additional questions. If you do have one, quick type it and send it right now. But otherwise, thank you so much, Bear, for
You're welcome.
round 2 of this.
You're welcome. I think they send out a little critique sheet, and this is only the second time I've done this. Those of you who know me is that I'm long-winded and can talk in circles, and that sometimes doesn't serve you well. It serves me great because that's who I am, and I do that naturally. So if you have some good-natured feedback that would help me in the future of doing this, I certainly would love to see that. If not, God bless you, and do right by the kiddos who learn differently. Thanks.